That's it. No advice, people. No advice. Don't give people advice until they ask for it. That's a big, big lesson.
Yeah.
You know, and even if they say they want it, like almost make them beg for it. That's where I would say it's a golden rule of life. If there's one thing you take away from this show today before we announce anything, that's the golden rule for today.
Yeah, and it's really funny. Like I had a situation today where someone was like,
by the way, we don't talk about that till we introduce the show.
I don't care.
Okay, good.
It's my show.
Oh, good. Take it. Own it.
And there was a part of me like, oh, I want to share the insights. I was like, nah, there's no question here.
I want to ask you a question about that. After we introduce the show, we have Craig Weinberg on, who is a man who I know very little to nothing about.
Very
I just
little.
like what he posts, and I had some fun and said, will you come on the show? Because he posted Karl Popper, and you know how I love Karl Popper.
Like, I don't care who you are in this world. You post anything about Karl Popper, you're on.
You're on. Karl Popper. We're going to discuss truth, not necessarily only Karl Popper, obviously, because we're not necessarily proficient enough. We're going to discuss truth on wonderful chaos. So you actually told the story, and I must be honest with you, I wasn't really listening because I was going to introduce the show. So what was it that you said before we began?
I don't remember.
You were talking about something. Well, while you're thinking about it, I'm going to
I'm not.
This show is dedicated to one of our favorite listeners, Bolalang. And Bolalang is always challenged with the idea of truth and distinguishing truth and belief. And he wants to do stuff in the world. He wants people to learn, grow, and understand in an impersonal way. He doesn't think things should get personal, as far as I've known him and interacted with him. And I thought, how great would it be to do a show on truth? And of course, it wasn't just because of Bolalang, but I love the fact that there's a high likelihood that he'll be joining us today.
This subject's a bit of a mindfuck, isn't it?
It is, and I've discussed it, and I really thought it could use an hour. And I thought, you and I normally take a subject a week and we just break it down. I thought, instead of us breaking it down, let's invite a third party on who maybe we don't even know that much about, but clearly spends time asking big questions.
You just came up with that.
Came up with what? With what?
With this setup.
Of course I did.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Do you think I've ever thought about anything before we started any show? It sounds good. I mean, I've often been fascinated.
I was almost so.
I think it's funny because everyone's like, wow, you produce so much. How do you do it? And I'm like, I kind of show up for an hour a day and we just let it materialize. But it looks like we've really done a lot of work to get this done.
Yeah.
A lot of effort. Truth was one of the biggest issues I had to figure out how to deal with when I first started going through my own personal development, spiritual awakening, whatever the word is you want to give it. And the idea of where is my truth, or whatever that word means, because that can also get very confused. Where does that meet other people and their truth? How do we decide if one is right or wrong, or how do we make it in a dialogue, or how do we find a dialogue? Like, that whole journey was really, it was painful. And I think I needed to make peace with that in myself before I could really be a good coach.
You had to what?
I had to make peace with that.
Oh, it's inside.
Oh,
here.
sorry. I had to make peace with the idea of how am I going to relate to truth when it comes to things, situations, individuals where I see we're not aligning on whatever it is we have ideas about. And then you get into beautiful situations like in the US when it comes to the politics, especially, where you would say two people and they would say, we each have our truths, and then they throw the truths out at one another with no reflection over what it is they're actually arguing a lot of times.
There's not much consciousness.
Or whatever consciousness there is, it's limited in its ability to reflect. So There's two things that I'd love to discuss when we bring Craig on. One is just the idea of truth, how each one of us has navigated in our lives. And second, when there is a sort of an inability to match or meet people, how do we address it in a way that doesn't create problems for ourselves, for the other, or maybe even bringing us closer together?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a kind of two aspects to that, which I think is really quite beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a hot thing to share, but I think let's bring Craig on.
Oh, wow.
Hey,
Craig.
Hey, how are you doing?
Nice to meet you.
And nice to meet you too.
You're on because you quoted this man,
All right.
Karl Popper.
He's like, who's he?
Who's he?
Yeah.
For those who don't know what Karl Popper is or who he is, that's who Karl Popper is. I always spell his name incorrectly because I forget if it's a K or C.
Oh, like Jung, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So what was the quote he posted?
You know, I thought I'd be organized and find it. Do you remember what the quote was you put on Karl Popper on your site?
Let's see. Usually I like his stuff about definitions, about, how you should never get into discussions about word definitions and that it actually distracts from things. And this kind of cliche philosophical, even really like we say, what is truth? Probably Karl Popper would hate that, right? Because it's like this big philosophical topic that you want to boil down to a word definition. What is truth?
Yes.
But I'm not sure that was actually the quote, though. But that's usually.
Yeah, and what you've just described is why I've found Karl Popper to be so incredible for me making peace with truth. Because what you said about boiling it down, like all of our minds are needing to boil everything down to a direct, precise answer so we can park it.
Right. And that's sort of one mode of thinking, one mode of sense making. And so in my kind of model of theory of everything, for me, it's all about sense. So intellectual sense or sense making is sort of one channel, like sight, sound. So thinking is another. It's sort of like a transparent sense that can act like other senses.
Nice.
Thanks.
But now this, and I like whenever I bring a guest on, I always hear another's lingo for another thing that I have. So Karl might be angry with us because in my sense making, I try to relate what I hear you saying to how I use it in my own words.
Uh-huh.
And when you were talking there, I would say there's only experience. Mm-hmm. And then from experience, we all use thoughts to try to create structures which make them make sense to us.
Sure. Yeah. And a little bit, I was reading a little of Popper's ideas that he was saying that basically all observations are theory laden, which I would disagree with a little bit. That I think they're always laden with your perceptions, but I think that you can have experiences without trying to make sense of them, maybe not as an adult, but as an infant or whatever, altered states of consciousness. You might just have experience without a lot of cognitive space to consider it or try to distill sentences and things about it. But he was more, I think, in that time where it was all about language and really trying to construct truths about truth through that language mode.
I think the thing I took away and why it's been so critical for me and why actually having the one guest I mentioned that I was really looking forward to him sort of being part of this is that what I took away from Popper, and keep in mind, you're doing more research and following philosophers more than I am. But what I've taken away from him is that you said you can't make theories or you can't state a theory to be true. Would that be fair to say, or how would you qualify what I just said?
Yeah, well, I mean, Popper was more about falsification, that you can't really say that a theory is true. You can say that this theory has more true things and less false things than our previous theory, and
Yes.
so we'll go with that, and that makes more sense. And I'm behind that. Generally, that it's about making more sense.
But the thing is that
Understanding more.
what you just said for me, and it's so weird because it's such a maybe a slight nuance, but it's the definition between someone that goes through life in peace or someone who goes through life in struggle. That what you just said.
Interesting. Yeah.
Does that connect? Because Bambos has heard me talk about this. I'm always curious with Bambos because every time I talk about things 100 times over, I'm wondering the whole time you might be thinking, Andy, I'm really happy you had that theory, but it means absolutely nothing to me. So I'm wondering, do you understand why that has always been so pathetically important to me?
Actually, I wasn't listening.
Oh, good. Okay. Nice. Well, the point being was that I saw until the time I saw that everything needed to be qualified, I got stuck in the idea that I held any truth, as opposed to this is basically the best working assumption that I have now at this moment.
Right. Well, I think I first got introduced to that kind of thinking as a kid. I read a lot of Robert Anton Wilson, and he talked about, that there is no is, that it's the idea that something is something, it puts is in quotes, is just, anathema, that all you can say is something seems, something appears, that you can't say that anything is something else, which sort of undoes itself on a certain level too, because you're saying that is, that is an objective truth, is that nothing is an objective truth. But it's still a good rule of thumb, that just to be aware that you're participating in this, that even if it's not a theory that you're consciously putting behind it, you're a human being, that, you have a whole physiological, sociological baggage, all these things are filtering your experience completely.
When you say it, right, nothing is. I believe that you can either logically hear it or feel it in your body of what the implications of experiencing life is. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
You said something about projecting into the moment and being aware, like this is how I'm perceiving this moment,
which is what Craig just said. Yeah. And I think what happens is people don't know the boundary between when they've created isness and they've created apparent isness.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there is one thing that is, and that is experience, that or what so qualia, right? So you can debate about the content of an experience and say, well, this, you have a dream, and you say this is a dream, but blue is still blue, right? It is blue. If you can see it, it is what it is,
but there would be people that argue whatever they're arguing, of course, that it's not really even blue. It's a wavelength that gets interpreted as blue and all that. So even that could be argued by somebody.
Yeah, it can be, but I think, sooner or later something has to sense something. That's what I like to say, that you can't, even doubt is you can't then doubt that you're doubting, or that something's doubting. So there is this experience, and so at some point, so experience itself is, and everything else can just be contents of an experience.
And there's
but not necessarily your own experience. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess you're going into the next phase of how I've at least addressed interacting with somebody when my perception of a situation is different than another person's perception.
Right.
And the thing you said, which is kind of interesting, is that what I can say is that this is how I perceive the experience as far as I'm aware, right? Because who knows what I'm denying in myself. But if I can hold to that experience, then I can actually interact with anybody there.
Sure. Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I don't need to defend anything because I don't need to prove that my experience is right. It's just the thing that I can view, and I just say that's how I felt, but it doesn't mean it's right.
Exactly. Yeah. And you experience it yourself in your own life. You know, as a child, you experience things as a child, right? You one day you don't want to play with toys anymore. It's like that was your experience, and then it's a different experience.
Yeah.
It's a different truth. Um, so I think of there's sort of subpersonal truths or impersonal truths, and there's personal truths, and then there's transpersonal truths. And I think a lot of the problems that we have is in having sort of a one-dimensional idea of truth, because sometimes they conflict, right? So impersonal truths about maybe math or physics, if you try to apply those to the human world, to your personal experience, um, you get something like a narcissistic, sociopathic personality, right? You're objectifying and everything and trying to predict and control other people and other things, which I think is kind of the crisis of modernity right now, or whatever
Yeah.
is coming out of that.
I think what people have lacking is any inquiry, self-inquiry.
Right.
Is I see lost when identity takes over, because
Yeah.
in identity, all you're trying to do is make a point that secures your identity, and if somebody tries to mitigate your point, they're not attacking the thing you're speaking to. They're actually attacking your identity.
Right. And that's how I like to think that I know I'm on the right track in a lot of arguments and things, debates that I've had online all these years, is that people who find myself opposed to or opposing me, it's always personal, right? It's always attacking my credibility or personal thing. Oh, I don't like the way you talk, or I don't.
I don't like the way you talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I mean,
do you ever troll people and just to fuck with them, knowing that they're going to take the bait?
I don't actually, but I get accused of it sometimes. Yeah.
Do you?
I did 2 days ago. I went on to.
Is this the part that you're ashamed of?
I wasn't ashamed, but it was just having fun. I was on. I just was like, I want to kind of get a sense of what's going on in the U.S. and post a pretty benign comment to a Biden speech, just because I want to get a barometer. So yeah. I said something in the range of, at some point we'll move all past this. America will find a way to make peace with each other, and just like a kind of a loving, I had 50 comments, 50 fucking comments of hatred. And then I was like laughing, because as I would reply to them, I would always write, this at some point this will pass and it'll be okay and we'll love again. I would just write really loving things, and they get more angry. They'd be more
interesting.
It was fascinating. And then I finally just took it offline.
How long did it take you to do this?
I basically posted the one comment. The other comments materialized over an hour. Over 50 comments.
Was this at 5 o'clock in the morning?
No. This was at 6.
Have you seen The Social Dilemma?
I only saw half of it.
Okay. No. Well, it ties sort of into that of, if you've monetized attention to a service, right, to social media, and then you see, if you just, what you can do to just antagonize millions of people, thousands of people, right, that lights up the board. Yeah. So if someone's making money off of that, then you realize why your social media feeds are weirdly, the algorithms are curating them in that way. So all you see are people you disagree with, and and then you can have to try to kind of deliberately, override that somehow. And
nice.
It's
I'm just saying, everyone I don't want to see, I just say fake news, fake news, fake news.
Okay, I'll try that. Yeah, I don't know.
Bolalong, I mentioned earlier, who's made a few comments already. What I find fascinating is that to some degree, I believe he can argue on his behalf, which he's not here to defend himself, that he feels like there's a truth that he's trying to convince other people of.
Okay.
And I think to some degree, a lot of us have that idea that there's something you don't get. And if you got it, then you wouldn't,
Sure.
then you would see what I see.
Yeah.
And what I've been fascinated with is that, wow, what if I didn't give a shit?
Right. That's a good discipline. I think.
That's the only difference between making peace. And then the argument comes, and I've seen this come from people on the Trump side or the Biden side. But if I didn't give a shit, the risk is so great to our country. I can't do that. I need to. I'm the one that can hold. I need to educate, and I need to change, and that's what I've seen a lot of.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. I don't, on my own stuff, I don't want to be a political guy, but I end up seeing so much bullshit that people post that it's like I feel a responsibility that someone has to say something. If you're just going to post lies all day, that dangerous lies, you have to say something sometimes.
When did you get most attacked for posting something that you said was in opposition to what people were thinking or believing that they posted?
Oh, geez. I mean, my main demographics that I argue with, it used to be, materialists, physicalists, right? And then computationalists, which is a similar kind of thing. And then, yeah, I mean, I will end up, I don't know about things that I have posted. I don't usually post political stuff. So
Yeah.
it's mostly philosophical stuff that people get mad if I say that, AI is never going to work, or, qualia is everything is qualia, and math can't math can't create qualia, right?
Yeah, okay.
That's that, and so people argue with me about that type of thing.
Craig, you mentioned earlier that the way you respond when people post lies, but how do you engage? Like, is it an assumption that there's lies?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And how do you go into that? Like, you are lying, or are you going with questions to try to get where they're coming from? Like, what's your angle?
It's evolved. A lot of times I'll just post a link from a fact checker, and it's just like, this is a known terrible garbage source, and I'm not saying it, they're saying it, just so this is what you're posting. Other people know that you're posting that,
So basically, you're attacking them, actually.
How do you know the fact checker is truth?
Well, that comes up too, right? That's the whole, right-wing paradigm of, yes, all fact checkers are in conspiring with each other, and the, democratic overlords to lie about it. Yeah, I mean,
I love it. It sounds like you've had that conversation 1 or 2 times.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've seen the whole thing, and I've seen it from that perspective too, briefly. I think that's what people don't understand, is what's going on is a powerful sort of transpersonal psychological effect that's unfolding over many years, like any totalitarian takeover or anything. It's not just that, somebody, read, they're choosing to believe one kind of style of view of reality. It's a whole perceptual worldview that is, being shaped over years for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, that happened with Fox News, of course. Bumbus had a question.
Yeah.
I don't get involved in these kind of conversations in general, because I just see two sides. This is the truth, this is the truth, this is the truth, and I feel the energy where they're coming from, and I just lose interest, because for me, I'm always feeling what the intention is. And in the end, it's not going to end well anyway. Like, someone's going to lose and feel shit, and someone's going to win. And what exactly did they win? They just made another human being wrong, right?
Right.
I'd love to transition to something which happened to me yesterday.
Oh, nice.
And maybe we can break it down a little bit, because I'm still in it. So I'm doing a little mini work. Is that okay with you, Craig?
Yeah, great.
So I'm in a little workshop. It's called The Illusion of Money, and they gave us triads. So I have my little mini group, and we did an exercise during the week where we had to really get clear what our financial situation is, what we're spending, what we're earning. And I really felt triggered because I literally just finished the exercise. I was really vulnerable. And we go in and I shared, and I was actually in tears. And at some point, my the two people that I'm working with, partners, let's call them A and B, started to give me, or they started to ask the questions, but I saw the questions were trying to take me somewhere.
They had statements,
and I contracted inside, like it took me out of the emotion.
Yeah,
right.
And immediately, the feeling that came up for me, which was really clear, I don't feel safe right now. Like I'm really vulnerable, and instead of just seeing that as where I need to be, there was, oh, you're resisting where this other thing. I'm like, no, I'm here, and potentially you're uncomfortable, and you're covering it up with advice. And I kind of got, in a way, I just told one of them to fuck off.
Nice.
With your coaching and shit, like it's not even asked for. And so what happened for me is I had a feeling, and there was a kind of a shutdown. And then when I allowed some words to come out, which weren't easy, I just named that I felt that the person was not comfortable with the emotion. So they tried to go into the coaching role to cover up their discomfort.
Sure.
And that was a projection, which I named. But because they reacted defensively, I just said, okay, so now this is truth. The fact that you're defending yourself,
right?
It becomes like, okay, so what are we? It means I'm touching something there.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's why I try to avoid being personal, especially on those kind of conversations, and try to kind of take it out of that context of I don't, I kind of try to remind myself that even if the person looks like a complete stereotype or whatever, that I don't know them, and they don't know me. And so, just like someone in your family or a friend you grew up with may be a complete opposite, ideological person now or whatever, but you may tolerate that, or, it shouldn't have to be personal about everything. And a lot of times I think people we're just trained to identify personally with any thought that we have, anything that we express. It's like it's you saying it, and if someone disagrees, then they disagree with you. And I try not to defend myself, because that's always the attack, is to make you to make you contract, make you emotionally respond. And then if you want to get neurological about it, right, it's like
fight
circulation is coming out of your prefrontal cortex and into your limbic system, and you're just ready to do battle. And that's not, I mean, if you're 15 maybe, but eventually
but there's something interesting that Bambos is kind of hinting on, and it would be nice to touch on that.
What did you catch?
Is that there's something which is it's an intuitive knowing, and it's a knowing which it's beyond, for me, truth. It's not trying to make itself true, but it knows there's something there. So like
intuition?
It is intuition, but there's something. So I was in a talk earlier today, and then I was speaking to the person, and then they started to ask me a question which showed that they had a judgment. And I laughed because I said, so I got to be honest, your question doesn't interest me at all. But the assumption that you make by asking me such a question is really curious. So what made that you ask that question?
Right.
And then we had an interesting dialogue, of course, because then we were interacting around what's the mechanism that makes him have a certain reaction, as opposed to now I have to interact with someone around something that is of little or no interest to me to satisfy a belief that they don't even know necessarily they have when they ask me the questions to begin with. And that came from a knowing. That's what I wanted to say. That didn't come from, hey, pick him up and let's have a conversation with him.
Yeah, it's probably a robocall.
So that came from a knowing, and I wouldn't call it then a truth, but there is a knowing. And I think that's an interesting, and it's not trying. If I don't trust my knowing, to be honest, then I actually would even say I lose track of me, because now I have to deny the kind of the bigger seer and pretend like everything is relative to everything else, where it isn't really relative.
Yeah. Well, that brings up a good connection between honesty and truth, and that kind of subtle awareness, the willingness to be honest about what you're actually picking up. When you were talking, it makes me think about like playing poker, where you can tell that they talk about being on tilt or whatever, that you start losing and you're kind of like desperate to not feel that way, and other people can kind of smell it, and things like that. That whole interpersonal dimension of I actually had a class. There was a professor at UCSB who talks about micro expressions, and he would just look at videos, break it down to the 10th of the second, and just look at every little nuance, and just take it apart and say what's really going on here, and you can see so much that it's all kind of scary. I mean, it's kind of overwhelming that just there's that much being revealed at all times, and to try to mask anything is even more of a tell.
That's what I'm always saying is you can hide, but you can't hide that you're hiding.
Right. Right. You can just try to obscure it and make it seem like, well, you might plausibly be set up some plausible deniability.
I feel a little bit mind-blocked between what you spoke to earlier, like the knowing and the truth.
It's a fine line, and it's the.
But just to be clear, I've experienced what the knowing is, but the truth for me is a fucking mind concept.
Nice.
And every fucking generation is going to have a different truth. So why the hell are we wasting an hour on this?
Right.
Like, can I introduce something?
Yes, please.
There's actually a game I want to play with both of you.
Okay.
And it's called the talking stick.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what Native Americans used to do, is pass around the stick. And it's a sin.
No, we're not playing that game.
We're not going to play that game.
No, we're not going to play that game.
But it's truth.
I will sit here quiet for the next half hour because I don't really care about talking.
Oh.
And I would like to have a discussion, because the game is only say something if it's relevant. Nothing's fucking relevant. We'll sit here quiet for an hour.
Or something will come up. And maybe that's the truth.
No, because...
Okay, so Andy doesn't want to play a game. Craig, do you want to play with me?
Sure, I'll try it.
Thank you.
I'll just leave the room because I'm like, I don't have anything actually to, but it's okay. We'll go.
So the idea is tuning into the present moment. What is the thing that needs to be spoken? And if it doesn't need to be spoken, then it's not spoken. We can also time it so we don't take up the whole show. 5 minutes?
Yeah, 5 minutes is good.
Time it.
Oh, great.
Feel relaxed.
That's my stick. I have to say that in a way, I really needed this silence. So it was great that I managed to manipulate this, even if it's 5 minutes.
I love that.
When I saw the subject of this podcast, I just felt a lot of confusion, because I really don't know.
I had the same. I don't know about confusion, but I don't think that much about truth. I think about sense and consciousness. Um, so I think of the more you try to find a truth about truth, the kind of further you get away from it because you're trying to have some mechanical formula, which is in some sense the opposite of truth. Um, and but it's a good jumping off point though. I don't mind it. You know, it's um, I think it's people have a lot of misplaced confidence in it. In you know that is it the absolute truth? Is it a relative truth? But I think of more just the deeper truth is deeper than truth. It's experience itself.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So, what do you think is the highest truth? Is that even a real concept of the highest truth?
Hmm. I feel that the highest truth is connected to each individual's connection to the experiences that they can integrate and ground back into a scene without interpreting. Seeing without interpreting.
So, sort of becomes part of them going
Yeah.
forward. Yeah. So you have these kind of peak experiences that people say they change their life because of this kind of high truth that it's just with you always.
What came up for me, and I don't attach anything to it, was the word love.
Yeah, I thought of that as well. Yeah, and I think that love is, I was talking about subpersonal, personal, and transpersonal kind of range of consciousness.
Mm.
That love is sort of the personal version of that is the most significant source of significance personally. And then if you want to kind of push that down to going downward toward physics and math, you get into like empathy, and then in general, just sensitivity. Any kind of a sensitivity is a way of connecting, you know, the local to the non-local or to the universal. So I think a lot about. I mean, that's to me that's the missing link of all these philosophical things is sensitivity, because a machine, our whole physical model now is of just sort of objects and actions, forces and fields. Um, but what is a field is just kind of like a range or an area that is magically charged with some effect. Whereas I think the universe has no fields; it has sensitivities. Um, it's all sensory motive. It's all participatory. So we have all these kind of concepts like information and energy that mechanize what is actually sensitivity,
Yeah.
responsiveness. And if we can shift that, if we can like get all, have a paradigm shift all the way down to that level, and then kind of rebuild it back up from metaphysics to philosophy and physics and mathematics and biology and politics. And that can happen pretty rapidly, as it did in the early modern period. We're just sort of on the other end of that now.
The thing in Andy's work, I don't know if you've seen his book, The Wounded Healer. He has this thing about projection reclamation work, and it is about also embracing the opposite of what you believe.
Yeah. At least in some way to take it seriously, at least to have empathy with it, to the extent that you can. And sure, although it can be, dangerous too, as far as, do you empathize with the bully? Do you, and that's a Popper thing too, right? The paradox of tolerance. Do you tolerate intolerance?
Yeah.
And I think he was right about that. You can't, right? I mean, you can't go you can't allow people to in you know involuntarily abuse people if people want to
Yeah.
be abused. And I mean, even that gets kind of sketchy. Do you let people abuse other people if they want to? And
Doesn't it
they
depend on the context? Because
totally, yeah.
I was talking today to some people that I photographed in a school, and one of the boys was calling another boy gay, and he was really loud, and I just saw how I would be treated as a little boy, and I was like, oh wow, this he needs the most love right now.
Yeah.
And I gave him the thing that he actually thought I was going to tell him off as his teachers would. But I gave him so much love that he actually helped me during the shoot to photograph the rest of the group.
Oh, nice.
So what the reason I'm sharing this, I think it also depends in tuning in and being fully aware of what's the context.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess behind every bully, there's a huge wound. And it's not like we're going to heal everyone's fucking wounds.
Right.
Sure. But to what degree do we not also contribute to that behavior?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that seems to be sort of the challenge of our time, right? I mean, there's just so much pain to go around, and you know
You said something that really I found very fascinating. It also connects back to some conversations I've had with Bola Long, who's also still with us, I believe. He was posting arguments with people around religion, and the beliefs that are portrayed that basically create dilemmas and problems for the society he lives in. So I called him up and said, "Hey, Bolalong, why are you arguing with people where it's a belief? You're fighting an identity issue. Like what?" And then he says, "Andy, I'm aware I'm fighting that, but not unlike what Popper said, is that when you tolerate intolerance, then what have you now done?"
Right.
And that's what he shared back to me, which threw me back on myself, because I, in my own experience with religion, they were annoying, but not necessarily dangerous as I experienced them.
Right.
Where he had a different experience, which then got me to really rethink. And as he told me he was even doing it consciously, I was like, wow, now I had even deeper respect for him, because he's putting his hand in the viper's nest, knowing that he's going to get bitten, and yet still seeing the essential nature of creating a contrarian view.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had come out growing up, I was very sort of anti-religious and science oriented. And then, I never have been fully, well, I saw the other side, sort of not coming to it intellectually, but just through other states of consciousness and experiences that I can relate to that now. But it can be dangerous, and as you've seen in history, it certainly has been.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the opposite, when science or scientism refuses to look at other levels of awareness and to value, humanity and in these in its full dimension, then what do? It has to be accounted for. It can't be denied forever. So people will turn to whatever, if they're being told that you don't really exist, you're just this biochemical reaction.
Yeah.
And, fuck you.
Exactly.
How
I'm
about that?
important. I'm special. I'm unique. No one like me.
And it's fucking great.
Yeah. Or the opposite is nobody's special, nothing's special.
Yeah.
Can't be. It's all just dust. It's, well, can it be both?
Yeah, I think my wife, she read I think the book was Homo Sapiens. I don't know if you read that.
I have it. I've tried to read it at some times, but yeah.
Okay, you didn't get it. Well, she basically was like spent the whole next month talking about, Andy, we're like ants. We're so insignificant, and yet we make ourselves so significant. And imagine if there was someone bigger than us. They would just step on us like we might step on an ant, thinking, how insignificant are these people?
Yeah.
I love Ronnie. If you knew his, I can actually hear her saying those words.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
That was it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, significance is a big deal. That comes out of sense. So I think of significance is the saturation of sense, right? So it's like sense squared, kind of. And truth would be the saturation of the intellectual sense, of the thinking sense, whereas like beauty might be the saturation of, if it's sound, music, it might be, the sense of saturation of sound, or if it's visual beauties.
But when you say saturation, what do you mean by that? How do you qualify it?
Richness, that it's a condensed, you're condensing more experience per second, the experience has more associations. It signifies more other experiences. It's more whole. Like
I'd often say as well, and this is an interesting, going back to this discussion I had earlier today, there was a lot of discussion around embodiment. And I find it hard in general to be around people that aren't particularly embodied.
That are not.
Yeah. So if someone does a course and then they explain to me the course they did, but the course came from somebody else who developed it, came to the realizations, like I have little interest in it. It's like it's three steps away from the source.
Right.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. I always like people to use examples if they're, especially talking about philosophical stuff, and everyone wants to get this kind of theory that you can plug in variables and it's super universal, and it doesn't. I can't even. It's just, give me an example of what you're talking about. Make it concrete.
Well, what's frustrated me is that I've seen.
I always love it when he starts like that.
A new generation of coaches and trainers who can tell you how a business is supposed to and must run and will run in the future.
Okay.
And yet I've never been in such a business before.
Right.
But I'm very clear that this is the future of businesses. And I find fascinating is that then they go into this sort of culture, which is a meta level understanding of how cultures function, not the culture you'd like to see, but just the interaction between people.
Right.
And then they superimpose behaviors in it, thinking we've established that these behaviors are better.
Right.
Disregarding that there's social dynamics, which are far bigger than anything you might be bringing forward into such a group.
Right. Well, when I was reading, just kind of preparing a little bit for this, reading a little bit about Popper and his views on how science advances. And that was kind of one of I think the criticisms of his views were that you can't take into account what you'll know in the future. So, it doesn't really give you the kind of, because Popper was really trying to say, you just take, he talked about the concept of verisimilitude, that you can't say what's true, but it's like truth-like. You can say it's, got more true things and less false things, and that's progress. But they're saying, but you don't really know. We're quite certain now of all these things that we've inherited, this legacy of science and everything, and we think we know because, I challenge a lot of people with my view of physics and everything, because we're using tangible instruments to measure tangible effects.
Yeah.
So we're asking a blind instrument to tell us what light is. Well, that's a problem if you're going to kind of base a lot of things on the results of that, and you get, the whole quantum mechanics. I think could be really fundamentally misguided. It's a fundamentally misinterpreted because we're not factoring in sense. We're not factoring in receptivity as a thing. So
Mm.
we're trying to graph everything out as just like these pseudo particle waves and superposition and all these things that may not be real at all. And I think of, well, if you were in a satellite and you were trying to come up with a theory of how pizzas get delivered, right? You could make all these models of, mathematical models of the pizza field and well, you have this initiation signal and then it activates in the city, these pizza receptors it's we're coming at it from completely distance. We're looking at, nano scales of things. And I think we're getting more of our own method than nature. We're
Mm.
we're getting the truth about objectification rather than the truth about everything.
Yeah. And that's how we can stay in our heads, because as long as we feel like we have control, which it often comes down to, if we have
Right.
control, then we feel like we can advance knowledge, but we can't do it with outside of control.
Right. Well, and it's very seductive. That's a
Totally.
lot of people will, well, it works. Quantum mechanics is the
Yeah.
most accurate science that we've ever. And it's like, yes, within that context, but maybe we're telescoping so far into that we're blind to everything else, and we're
Exactly.
actually winding up with an inverted view of
Well, it,
nature.
it would go to the difference between the validation or the falsification that we began with, is that if everything you do is trying to validate what you already have built your assumptions upon, then you'll never learn anything that maybe is outside of that, because
Exactly.
you're only looking at the factors that validate and not
Right.
the
Right.
invalidate.
It's
Yeah.
it's the echo chamber is exponential.
Yeah.
And how do you get out of it?
Bolalong talks to a
Okay.
bit of the point you made a second ago, which is there's no debate between science and religion. Religious people make it as if science is against them.
Mm.
Imagine a person using a technological tool and telling me that he hates science because
Right.
he is religious. There is no connection there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that to some extent, especially if you say religion, which makes me think of, canonize, rituals and liturgy and all these things but spirituality and science, or I mean, you talk about spirituality, you're really talking about consciousness. Um, I think I say that. And you go back to what is the source of science. It all comes from philosophy, right? I think science is sort of uh, philosophy on steroids. It's a results oriented philosophy, but
Yeah.
it all comes from, any astronomy comes from astrology, right? Alchemy, chemistry comes from alchemy. It all comes from
You know,
primal.
you
Yeah.
you could kind of look at the two worlds, which are pretty well stated between like Socrates' method and
Mhm.
Plato's method of finding knowledge.
Right. Yeah.
You know the distinguisher in the two of these?
No.
Plato was all about making statements, so he was very much tied to the scientific method we use today. And Socrates said that it's the questions that define our knowingness. So he was only known for asking questions, which is kind of beautiful if you think about it. A philosopher
Right.
who established that it's only the questions that establish our understanding.
Yeah. And I love the symmetry. I love any kind of polarities,
Yeah.
opposites. I'm constantly, when in doubt, just kind of reverse it and play with
Yeah.
that. That's a
In
truth.
fact,
That's a truth trick to
yeah,
me.
there was one quote in the book that where Popper quoted somebody else that I highlighted. I didn't do a lot of highlights. I'll give this to you if you want to read it afterwards, Bambos. This book would kill him.
Why?
It's math. It's lacking any level of human. He breaks it down scientifically more than emotionally. I'm missing it, but basically what it came down to is the more aware we become, the more we see that all of our thoughts live in paradox.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, you can think of sort of even in physics that there's this like perturbation of a fundamental nothingness, that there is, you know, a universe from nothing, that there's string theory or whatever, that you've got something that's fluctuating from a 0 point.
Yeah.
So everything, and that's, you got your yin yang and everything too.
Mm.
That theme is pretty powerful.
The one thing that I brought in earlier, which I kind of go back to, is that, and I was gonna do a full show on this. I didn't really connect this show with the other title which we had, which was Truth, and I think as we both, or both of you suggested, calling it truth is kind of a misnomer, because it's like a red herring. Because in a way, if you're aware that we create it from our senses, then you already have that understanding that our experience guides how we experience truth, and the degree to which we can reflect on our experience is the degree to which we can evolve whatever that truth might be.
Sure. Yeah. But then isn't that a truth? Then isn't that sort of becoming a more objective truth
that would be more
called outside of any personal experience, but generalized lots of experience?
That would be the Karl Popper truth, because it would then say it accepts that it's limited to its experience, but it takes its experience seriously.
Yes. That to me is the whole thing. Because when you start saying that everything is just experience, people have this visceral reaction against it. No, physics is real, and this is like, yes, it's real because it's an experience, because it's an ancient, experience that envelops the whole context of our experience. So yes, it's as real as anything could ever be. But it's still experience. It's still It's not information and it's not objects. It's a sensory motive participation. All the way down.
And Bolalong writes, telling and asking go to the same objective, but asking gets you buy-in.
Buy-in meaning just kind of opening.
Well, I've found this. It's funny he says this, because I think, who gives a shit what I think I know? I really honestly believe that.
Right.
Like who gives a shit? Like it's it's a construct in my head. So the only thing I know if I'm interacting with someone is what is the assumptions they're making in terms of a statement they made. So if someone says, Andy, Trump is the best president who's ever walked the planet. So I know that that's true. It's true because the assumptions that they've made validate that truth. So how can I argue with that truth other than understand what are the assumptions that they've made in order to make that statement?
Beautiful.
Right.
In a way, celebrating them.
Yeah. And therefore, and this is where it gets interesting. And this is where you have to then say, but Andy, what if you believe that this totalitarian dictator who has his finger on the nuclear button might push it for whatever god-awful reason? Is it your moral obligation to then fight the oppressor?
Right.
That's
and how do you really do that? How do you do that without becoming fodder? Becoming the target that, they're fighting back. So
they must be. They're in that one statement I made, which this will be over at some point. We'll come back together as a nation, right? Yeah. Then the fact that turned into 50 comments,
right?
It was all personal. It was, you come from a shithole city like Trump, and I'm like, where did that come from?
What city was that?
Anyone that didn't vote for Trump is a shithole city. To this guy who was, who basically, the guy, he had the American flag on his thing, and he was driving a big truck. It was very much a man's man that,
Right. I mean, I would like to.
Oh yeah. I got love it or leave it. Leave the fucking country, you prick. You don't know what you don't know what unity is, asshole. All of that. I was like, wow, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
You get your kicks out of that.
Oh, I loved it. And I wrote back all the time, guys, let's just love each other. Whatever we do, whoever we vote for, let's just love each other. And then there would be more animosity. Like
right.
They hated it.
Well, Another topic for a different time that's related to truth is authenticity. And that to me is a more, fertile issue, especially now. So I want to know, if people are arguing with me online, are they authentic or are they just, trolls or shit posters or whatever?
So how do you find that out?
I mean, there's tip-offs, right? You can most of the obvious trolls are obvious, right? You look at their profile and it's, 2 inches thick. There's nothing
Yeah.
there. They don't, but it's hard to know. You bring your own expectations. How paranoid do you want to be? How
Yeah,
how
that's what I
widespread
did.
do you? Yeah.
I took the comment off because I'm like, I don't need this grief in my life. Who are
Right.
these
Oh
idiots?
yeah. And that's the thing. How much do you want to put yourself out there? Well, who knows what some of these people are going to do.
Yeah, I'd like to stay with that for a minute. You said another topic, but I'd like to spend a little bit of time on that one. Authenticity.
Right.
And when you say authenticity, there's a sentence that comes into my head. Do you guys know the sentence?
Hmm?
Do you have a guess at it?
Does it have the word fuck in it?
No. I am speaking my truth.
All right.
When I hear that, I kind of want to take a shit and then come back and then let it, because what I hear is I'm not going to tell you how I feel. I'm going to tell you everything I've already made an assumption about, which I want you to validate because
Right.
I need you to validate it so I feel better about all the assumptions I made.
And you have no choice but to validate it. I've
Of course.
already validated it. It is my truth. So
Yeah.
yes, it doesn't really matter what you say. It is my truth.
It's
Yeah,
my truth.
And that's completely authentic.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah,
and that's what they teach you in these authentic relating courses. And I don't deny what?
I don't teach that.
Okay.
That's not my truth.
I forgot. Bambos also teaches authentic relating courses.
Actually, I don't call it that anymore.
Oh, yeah.
I just call it connection games.
Oh, connection games. That's better.
Okay.
But what happens is that I don't doubt that is a great, what do we call those sentences before a
sentence stems?
It's a great sentence stem when you're connected to the intention of detached scene. So with the correct intention, I love the sentence stem. But what I see is that people use the sentence stem incapable of seeing that it's not as carte blanche that now you can say whatever's in your brain and think the other person has any responsibility for it.
Right. It's been ruined. It started out as something pretty profound, and then now become the opposite. As a lot of things do.
Yeah, but that's where when you said authenticity, I often see that people misconstrue authenticity with sharing their unfiltered, unself-regulated opinions.
Sure. Yeah. I think of it more in a elemental way of what is authenticity is, as opposed to a simulation or an imitation. What is it? And that goes back to truth of kind of being connected to the larger contexts of experience. So in the dream, things are true in the dream, and then you wake up and they're not. And because you spend more time awake, those truths are more important than your dream ones. So that's kind of where I see it's all connected with it: significance, authenticity, connection to the bigger picture. But then there's 2 ends of the bigger picture. There's that far subpersonal, impersonal, math and mechanical, big picture, and then there's the transpersonal, the holistic, philosophical.
Okay. So I'd love to do that, what you just said, because I would love to give those words actually a kind of a type of experience.
Okay.
So I've noticed that when people talk in the I know space, it goes often to the objective truth outside of them, which has assumptions in it that they are not necessarily aware of, but they've allowed that to be true. Now, when you say an authenticity, where I would say goes into, and there's then in my own, and I don't have a model for this, but I would say there's deepening levels of authenticity. And the authenticity would be, I don't agree with you, would be like maybe one level of authenticity. I've basically stated in an impersonal way where I don't have to show any of myself. So I am being authentic, but I'm not showing anything that might leave me vulnerable.
Right.
And then there's a deepening level, which might be, well, what you say, if it's true, makes me scared.
Right.
Which would be, and then there might be another level, which is, I really can't make any sense of what you're saying. And maybe it's true, but I don't even know how to begin understanding it. So it's almost, I'm showing more deepening parts of me to the point that each level is to some degree authentic, but on one level, it's met with such love because you can see that it comes from a place which is not negating you, nor negating oneself. And yet it's still pure. It almost, I'd say the measurement is love. Can you feel the love in the person's observation? And then that would be more what I've been seeing as authentic, as in my own terminology. Yeah.
I like the way you shared that.
And when you talk about that, I see this interpersonal, which is kind of funny, is when am I sharing the deepest part of me in a way that other people feel it inside of themselves, because it's really a shared experience.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what makes it transpersonal, or that's part of it, right?
Yeah.
It's, and that on some level that's going on within you too, with it, even if you're completely physicalist or neurological, that somehow your brain cells, your neurons have to be sharing an experience. They have to be, accessing a transcellular reality,
Yeah, I think you can only go to that when you're truth exploring inward more than outward. Because what it is you're aware that your sensors are also corrupted by whatever it is they've been indoctrinated with. So in some ways, it's almost like, oh, I even know my senses are actually limited. So I'm questioning even what my senses are picking up. And that takes another level of awareness, which unfortunately, the world at this moment is severely lacking when it comes to politics, especially in the US, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, that was really beautiful, because I had a talk last week at the Rotary Club in Amsterdam, and there was a Russian woman who started going after all Americans as being inauthentic or being pretend authentic. And and what I laughed at was I'm like, yeah, she's got a point. But I also could see at the same time, when people are making statements, it usually says more about them than it does the thing that they're judging.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, fascinating.
I was the witness.
Yes.
And I filmed it.
It's
online.
Oh, cool.
It was a nice talk. Thank you. I appreciate the fact that you came on discussing a subject that we all agreed would be kind of a random thing for all of us to discuss, but
I never agreed to anything.
He never did.
Good.
I just show up.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I hope Bolalong got something out of this, even if we didn't necessarily get to all of his statements, but he's a big fan, and we deeply grateful for all of the support he's been giving us throughout the wonderful Chaos shows.
Thank you, Craig.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank
you for being with us. Send you a hug. Yeah.
Okay.
Adios.
Bye. Hey, that was nice. I like that you did the talking stick.
I actually could see how much you enjoy talking about this subject. Like, you almost had a hard on.
Yeah. I think it's not the subject. It got to the point where when we talk about allowing your experience to guide you, it's one of those things that when I think there's maybe 5 things that had to come together for me to allow that to happen. And one of them was not trusting myself anymore. So it was a paradox. In order for me to become more confident, I needed to first accept that I was utterly confused.
That really resonates.
And when I became okay with being utterly confused, this framework of seeing Popper was like, oh shit, that's the anchor. So that's what gives my experience a rational explanation. So I can't say that. I would almost say that probably the experience came first, and then Popper's explanation helped me articulate what I was feeling, but I couldn't put into words. And the feeling is that everyone's statement is true because they decide the context where they make it true. So now I'm like, why would I argue with anyone? The rest of my life, I'm settled. I'm free.
Just because everyone has a truth based on the context that they've experienced.
Yeah. And now if I'm curious, I'll ask them questions like, hey, what makes you say that? What's the context? How did you come to? And what you'll find, what I've found throughout the years, is if I've stayed open to that, then in time, either they will lose steam and they'll start to hear their own arguments and why they don't work well, or they'll maybe even I'll learn something. Like there's not it's a dialogue space. It's not a how do I convince him that he's wrong and I'm right space.
Yeah.
And so that helped me a lot. So when we talk about experience and how we own that, or when we talk about truth, I really get excited because I think 80% of what I coach and teach, if people understood that alone, they wouldn't need me. Because they'd say, oh, Andy, I can navigate anything now because when everyone says anything, I just am open because I understand they create the context to make their statement true. So why would I ever argue with anybody? Like it's that. And then you get into questions like, what if you're in a situation like Popper, who was obviously around during Second World War? What if the truth is in opposition or it's terrorizing another? What's your moral obligation? That's a wholly different question, of course. And some people say it's my moral obligation to do everything, and then that's you see where that goes as well. They often will live lives where they're fighting every windmill.
Yeah.
How did you make it through the show? How was it?
I felt pretty good.
Yeah.
Are you going to put the closing?
I know. I thought we'd at least discuss maybe next shows. Tomorrow we've got Shane Izikowski. Incredible artist. Izikowski. Dark artist. It's incredible. His art is mind-blowing, a bit grotesque, very, very hard to look. Have you seen it?
Yeah. You showed me the one from David.
Okay, he's got some rougher ones than that. Some great minds, Bob Deutsch. We're going to talk to him. He's talking about leadership. He's interviewed a lot of great leaders, a lot of people we know, famous. He's written books, and we'll discuss that with him. He's also got, I think, a TED Talk that's really nice online for those who want to have a look ahead.
Sweet.
Marcel Heinemann, we're going to talk to him about being an artist. Hong Kong, how we perceive life so differently. If we look at the world through the eyes of someone living in Hong Kong or from America or from the Netherlands, we have a wholly different way of looking at it. He's telling me that we see it all wrong, which I like.
I love it. There's a truth there.
Yeah. I don't know if he's so hard, but it was not. And that's all of our shows for this week, actually, right?
Is that true? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's one more, Changing the World. That's on Friday.
Oh, that's Changing the World. Yeah, we've got Dylan on.
13-year-old.
Who's actually done a documentary series that won some awards on plastic in the oceans. And we're going to discuss with him how it feels to live at a time when people like us are destroying the world that he's coming into.
And he says that with a big smile.
I was going to say, and Bambus is going to go to sleep now on
A Wonderful Chaos.
Good night.